Hi, thanks for joining us for this customer panel on building applications on a trusted data foundation. I'm Jan Kleinert, and I lead the Infrastructure Developer Advocacy team in Google Cloud. I'll be the moderator for this session today. And with us, we have Christian Cebulskis, who is the Director of Technology at Broad Institute, and Joel Meyer, who is the Chief Architect at OpenX. Christian and Joel, thanks so much for joining us today. I'd like to start by having each of you tell us a little bit about your company, what it does, and what your role entails. Christian, we'll start with you.
Sure. So the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard was founded back in 2003 as a nonprofit biomedical research organization. And its mission is to deliver on the promise of genomics by developing tools and distributing them broadly to the world, to researchers both at the Broad and beyond, and using those tools to unlock questions about basic biology leading to the understanding and cure of human disease. At the Broad, there's a data science platform, which is further supporting that mission by building cloud-based products and solutions for our researchers. And in that group, what I do is I look at emerging technologies, both computational, like cloud-based technologies and products, as well as scientific and algorithmic products like novel DNA generation sequencing technologies to further empower our scientists.
An OpenX is an ad exchange, and what that means is that we're helping publishers, the people who make the content you consume, whether that be websites or mobile applications, things like that, basically make money by connecting them with advertisers who are interested in showing ads on their platform.
Great, thank you. So next, I'd like to have each of you tell me a little bit about the Google databases that you're using today, and also what's your favorite one, which doesn't have to be one of the ones that you're currently using. Joel, let's start with you this time.
Sure, I think in order of magnitude, Bigtable is probably our biggest use case. After that, we've got Memory Store using the Memcache flavor of that. And then Cloud SQL, Postgres, and then probably the smallest, I think we've got Firestore used for some emerging products.
Great. And we've got probably a little bit of everything going on, a little bit of Firestore, a little Memory Store. We definitely are exploring other technologies like BigQuery and so forth. But I'd say our workhorse is really Cloud SQL databases. We've got a number of both MySQL and Postgres managed Cloud SQL databases, both at small and large scale and throughout a number of different microservices. So I'd say that's my favorite because it's probably the most impactful for us.
And I'd like to share my favorite, if you don't mind. I forgot. It's not one we use, but I think Spanner is my favorite because of the premise behind it. If if Google can solve a really hard problem, how do we keep clocks synchronized across vast geographies? Then you make a bunch of other problems a lot easier. And so I think I like it because of what it stands for, even though it's overkill for most of our use cases.
Yeah, I'd have to just to build on that as well. I'd have to say, in my emerging technologies role, Spanner is definitely out there as like I can't wait to find the right problem for this solution because I think it is going to be really transformative. But we haven't found that yet today.
Yeah, Spanner is great. It's really powerful, but like you mentioned, for the right use cases. So Christian, I understand that Broad Institute is running a large COVID-19 testing operation and that you had to set it up pretty quickly in a short time. From a developer's perspective, what did that look like?
Sure. So let me set a little bit of context about what we're doing there and then what it looks like for our developers. So back last March 2020, right, we all were adjusting to this rapidly changing world of the pandemic. We were all suddenly working from home, trying to figure out how to work with our teams and what we were even doing. And at that time, Michael Mina, who's a professor at the Harvard School of Public Health, phoned one of our co-chair of infectious disease saying, the Broad generates a ton of genomic data. You've got a clinical testing lab that's a bit smaller scale. You've got the right pieces. And he believed that testing was the key to sort of controlling the pandemic. So with that, all the gears got set in motion. And within 2 weeks, we were kind of targeting to launch our first COVID diagnostic test. So that meant both in the lab developing the assay, proving that it works, getting all the compliance stuff sorted, supply chain, building out the right kind of biohazard containment rooms. From a software side, we had 2 weeks to build and stand up a system to process this data. We had a clinical testing lab, so we had software that could manage some of the basics of tubes moving around the lab and so forth, but we didn't have anything around this PHI required for clinical testing. COVID, of course, obviously was brand new. How do we manage and process that data? So our development team was, I think, 3 people at the time. We were sort of borrowed from different places. We knew we had to build the solution quickly. So we couldn't build very much at all ourselves. We had to focus really on our business logic. And it had to be a kind of a very compliant and secure system as well, which also led to not building a lot of stuff because you'd have to prove that that's all secure and compliant. So what we landed on was a lot of serverless technologies on GCP. We used cloud storage, cloud functions. Um, in terms of data storage, I guess our managed Cloud SQL database was at the core of all of this. We had a Postgres database that was kind of a no-brainer for us to say, like, we know we need something relational. It's got to be the right scale. It's got to be secure and compliant. We've got to be able to turn on high availability, read replicas, get backups working. And so from a developer perspective, in some sense, it wasn't much of a story because we immediately decided that's what we needed to have at the center of the solution. And it worked fantastically well. That first day, we ran 140 tests for COVID. About a year later, we ran 150,000 tests a day. We do somewhere between 10 and 20% of all the COVID tests in the nation on a given day. And so it's been a huge success story, both for the lab, of course, but I think from our software perspective in GCP, like we couldn't have done it without all these managed and serverless technologies.
Great. Going from 140 tests a day to 150,000 a day is an incredible scale.
It was pretty amazing. And it was almost a year to the day we had 100x scale up of our first day. So it was pretty fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Joel, you mentioned that OpenX is an ad tech platform and that you're using Bigtable and Memory Store. At a high level, can you tell me kind of like what problems you're using those technologies to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're working with publishers, but the money is coming from advertisers. And so one of the challenges that we're trying to solve is how do we help advertisers find the audiences they're interested in? And so if you think about the number of people and devices on the internet, that is a large number of entities, and we need to, every time we get a request, do a lookup and learn a little bit about that audience member so we can share that with our bidders so that they can make informed decisions. And so at a high level, that's what we're doing.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Can you tell me a little bit about maybe why you chose those two particular options?
Yeah, when we were looking at the different cloud providers, you've got kind of the other guy in their solution, and then you had GCP and Bigtable, and both of them were really compelling because we were managing infrastructure and software ourselves, and that there was considerable expense there. One of the selling features of Google was, though, access to Bigtable, which was really designed for this type of scale. So we all, and to Christian's point, we were also looking to do as little management of software ourselves. So we preferred, I don't know that you call Bigtable serverless, but we preferred managed solutions wherever we could. And Bigtable fit well. So we started with just Bigtable and got decent performance, but we'd done some modeling where we wanted to achieve a better, I think, price to performance ratio. And working very closely with the Bigtable team, they recommended, making an architectural change and adding a layer of memory store in front of Bigtable. And so, which was great. We made that change. We added an additional managed service, but I think we ended up cutting our cost in half and still, and increasing our throughput, from like 10 milliseconds latency to 4 milliseconds or something like that.
Moving along in a slightly different direction, this question will be for both of you, but we'll start with Christian first. How did the development cycle change when moving to managed databases? Like what had to be done differently from your developer's perspective?
Yeah, so it actually was a pretty smooth change, and honestly, it was a while ago because we moved into GCP, and when we got onto GCP, we very quickly landed on managed databases for our Postgres and MySQL sort of use cases. So it's kind of hard to remember, but I do recall that people picked up pretty quickly. One thing that was very nice is that they could stand up a true replica of our production environment in terms of technologies very easily. We do still use sort of embedded or local versions of MySQL and Postgres for automated testing. So we don't want to have to deploy a managed service every time someone makes a branch and a pull request to run some sort of integration tests. So we still do use some local things there, but by and large, we're using the managed solutions for our databases.
Okay, great. Do you find that works well, having, for automated testing, having the non-managed kind of like on-premises versions, and then managed for the rest of your deployments?
It's okay. It works all right. I'd say I wish I could use the managed versions, that I would, be okay to stand those up every few minutes as PRs are being merged and whatnot. It just didn't seem like the the effort of that, both from a latency perspective and just a complication perspective, was worth it. But if that got easier, like I think we definitely move in that direction. We have had times where our local version of MySQL is a slightly different, it's out of date a little bit, or something's been upgraded, and we'll find some bugs pretty rarely, but it has happened. So eliminating that would be great.
So Joel, same question to you. How did your team's development cycles change with the move to managed databases?
I'd say that the development cycle got shorter, and where we notice it varies. On the higher end scale of things, it's huge, right? If we were deploying a new key value store on-prem, you'd have to project, okay, how much hardware do we need? You need to order it, you need to rack it, manage all your roles, get it all deployed, and that's a non-trivial lead time. Whereas in Google Cloud, it's maybe give your account manager a heads up and then spin it up, right? And like Chris, we're using Terraform so that it's all infrastructure as code. So I would say in that case, it's significantly shortened. On the side of things where somebody needs a MySQL database, even there it improved because again, it's okay. Write some Terraform, deploy it. It's in your project. You can track your cost versus, well, I think so and so's got an instance you can use, or go request a server. So it got a lot more streamlined, and I think it turned everything into a code problem, which is that's the kind of problems we know how to solve.
Yeah, adding on that too, I'd say debugging problems, it's been really helpful for people to make, I need a database. I need a copy of something and I need my own isolated database. And in the past, that would be, we'll talk to the DBA to stand up an instance or get a new schema somewhere, and all those concerns about sizing and so forth will come up. And now they can go to the Google Cloud Console and click, either make a copy of this database or, make me a new database and I can load some data in there. And they're really empowered in a way that they weren't earlier.
So I think it's interesting that both of you mentioned Terraform when you were talking about your environments. Along those lines, are there any other tools, whether it's developer tools, observability tools, troubleshooting tools, that your teams use that you find are really critical to success in working with these databases?
I'll go first, maybe. I'd say I started with the Cloud Console, and I know I can't say enough good things about just that, what seems like a really simple feature, right? A basic UI to do things. But we have folks who aren't doing it every single day, and they come once in a while, I need to make a clone of this database, or I need to look at some setting. They can do that very quickly without having to go remember what are the command line, invocations to make that thing happen. So that's actually maybe understated, but I think really valuable. I'm very excited about SQL Insights. I'd say maybe 6 months ago, I'd say that's the thing I was asked. I wish I had. Now we have it. I wish I had it for MySQL, because we do have a mix of MySQL databases that are often, before Postgres support was available as a managed database, we leaned towards MySQL, and now we're shifting over. But I'm really excited about seeing our developers use that tool.
Wonderful. So I have definitely heard the requests for Cloud SQL Insights to be supported for MySQL as well. So you're not alone on that. We've heard that loud and clear. So have you used it with some of your Postgres databases yet? Have you had a chance to try it out?
Just exploring it a little bit. I would say, our big Postgres database is our COVID testing database, and actually, fortunately, has had very few challenges with it. The data is fairly simple. But our other sort of older, more complex systems are often the MySQL ones. And so we haven't had the right problem yet, but I think it's going to be very valuable.
Understood. So Joel, over to you. What sort of tools have been critical for your teams in working with databases?
I'll echo what Christian said. I think the console is an amazing tool just to see what's going on, what's happening there, the way it's integrated with the monitoring interfaces, the big table heat map view. That's just cool. I mean, we used it when we were troubleshooting earlier on, and we haven't really used it much since things are working. But it's an incredible visualization of what's going on inside the system. I think also we're a huge Prometheus, um, I guess, user. We instrument everything, and that helps us see from outside the perspective, from the perspective of clients, what is performance like? And then we can reconcile that against what we're seeing in the console from, the databases themselves. And so that's proven to be incredibly useful. I guess one more thought there is, even in the console, you've always got access to the support. And we found that to be really helpful too. File a ticket and you get, escalated to somebody who knows the answer, and there you go. So appreciate that as well.
Great. I'm glad that's been a good experience for you. So Christian, today at Broad Institute, obviously, as you've mentioned, you're using Google Managed Databases at scale. Can you tell me a little bit about what influenced your decision to move to manage in the early days?
Sure. So when the data sciences platform started, we knew we were going to be cloud native. And so we had two choices in front of us, right? Like stand up and manage our own databases or go towards managed databases. I think it was pretty easy for us thinking that, again, we were a small team at the time and really wanted to accelerate our development process. We honestly didn't have a ton of DBAs around. The Broad as an organization has thousands of scientists and a very small percentage of software engineers. So we're definitely a scarce resource. And so again, we did have some databases that we deployed and managed ourselves. We had a Mongo instance and a graph database, but we pretty quickly gravitated towards everything being in managed databases because of that. The lower total cost of ownership, I guess I would say. Day one, maybe it's okay for a developer to stand up a Mongo instance. But over time, as you're having to deal with backups alone, I think, make it a really compelling story. And then all the other features around scaling up and scaling down really made it a no-brainer.
Makes sense. Joel, so we have a numbers-oriented audience, listening with us here today. Can you give us some of the metrics or statistics that come to mind with regards to the databases that you're using? Could be, number of requests, amount of data that you store. You mentioned your dev cycles are shorter. Are there any metrics that come to the top of your head?
Sure. I think, in terms of read operations, at peak, we're doing about 1.5 million per second. Write operations are around 200,000 per second. Actually, I think that number is a little out of date. We're handling just under 200 billion ad requests a day, and that's up since I looked at these numbers a couple weeks ago for Ron. In terms of data, I think we've got around 80 terabytes of data in Bigtable. And I should clarify, these are mostly Bigtable numbers. So that's Bigtable. Latency with the memory store cache in front of it, we're looking around a 1 millisecond latency for our lookups at the P50. P99 went at 13 milliseconds now. I think when we were Bigtable only, it was around 20 milliseconds. So, caching with memory store has been a great success for us. Those are the ones I've got off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's some pretty incredible scale. Christian, do you have any similar kind of metrics off the top of your head? Not to put you on the spot.
Not so much. I guess I would say our power is not in our response time so much, although that is important to our users, but it's really around the stability and reliability of our system. And so I don't have numbers on me, but I know the number of times we've had outages due to our infrastructure, especially around databases, has been very small. And when it has been there, it's been our fault in the sense of like it's application code or something like that, not infrastructure.
That's great. Yeah, reliability is so key. Changing gears a little bit. And Christian, you alluded to something like this already, talking about Cloud SQL Insight support for MySQL. But if we could add one feature or change one thing that would make your experience working with Google databases better for you, what might that be? This is something I really care about because from the developer advocacy perspective, we're always looking to hear feedback that we can bring back into Google Cloud to try to make the developer experience better. So what stands out to you?
So one thing that I think would be super cool and impactful would be now that we've been working more with serverless technologies, so looking at Cloud Functions and even BigQuery as like kind of a fully serverless analytics data store, having something that's a truly serverless relational database like Cloud SQL, but being able to scale all the way down to zero, and then again scale up to hit your peak loads. What we find is we run a lot of instances and they're always the wrong size. They're typically over provisioned because we're worried about the peak days, and the peak days are always bigger than we expect them to be. And that might also allow us, when I talked earlier about this sort of unit testing sort of approach, if it was a serverless technology, we could, again, use those as we needed them, throw them away, or just stop using them. They would scale down on our behalf. So I think that'd be probably a hard problem, but I think it'd be very cool and impactful.
Well, great. Thanks for that. And Joel, what about you? What's one feature we could add or one thing we could change that would make your experience better?
That's a great question. We're really happy with memory store in front of Bigtable, but it's one of those things that feels like it might work really well behind an abstraction. Bigtable with Bigtable caching, just integrating those two so that we're not having to manage them individually. So off the top of my head, that's probably what I'd ask for. It's not a big thing though.
That's cool. So if I understand correctly, kind of being able to combine the feature set of the two of them together so that you wouldn't have to manage it across two separate.
Exactly. Kind of transparently stand up that cache layer for you.
Cool. Thanks. That's also a great idea. So, Kristen and Joel, thanks so much for joining us for these great conversations today. As we get ready to wrap up, do you have any advice, considerations, or things to look out for that you'd like to share with others as they're considering moving to managed databases, but maybe aren't sure if it's right for them? Joel, let's start with you.
Sure, I hope we've got a lot of time because I've got a few. I think off the top of my head, I'd tell people moving to managed services is a great way to focus on what matters to you. You know, where do you really add value? Nobody is benefiting their business by running MySQL, running a key value data store. You know, these things are out there. You should just use it. I would say if you're considering moving to the cloud or refactoring, that is worth doing. Don't just lift and shift. And to Christian's point earlier, I'd encourage people to look very heavily at serverless solutions. Again, on that theme of look, spend your precious engineering resources doing the thing that makes your company unique, not doing the thing that's commodity busy work. And GCP can honestly probably do better.
Yeah, I'd have to echo all that, Joel. That was great. I would say, there's this aphorism in medicine that you might have heard also that if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. I think when you think about your own database and running your own database, and we've fallen victim to this too, where we think, well, we're special, our use case is special, we have to have this full control. Just think again and then think a third time and make sure that that really is going to be the difference for your business between running your own database or using a managed database, because it's probably not true and it's not going to be worth the long-term cost of doing it yourself. It may be, and if so, more power, like definitely do it. But I'd say most times we found that that's not the case and we're better off using a managed solution.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, that's about all the time we have today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.